Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast edition of So What You Saying. My name is Tom,
And I'm Sean.
and today we're going to be talking about two monumental icons that have passed away within the same week. Monumental icons within their respected fields, that being Ozzy Osbourne and Hulk Hogan. Ozzy passed away, I believe it was Tuesday, and Hulk Hogan, at the time of this recording, passed away yesterday. Yeah, so to lose both of those legends back to back in the same week is just unbelievable. So I mean, myself and Sean, we'll start with Ozzy. Myself and Sean are, we love heavy metal music, we love rock and roll music. We have done since, close to 25, 30 years now. And I mean, hearing about Ozzy's passing, it was a bit weird for me because I wasn't surprised because
Mm.
Ozzy has been ill for a long time, but at the same time, I was flabbergasted
Yeah.
because, what, just less than 3 weeks ago at the time of this recording, he was literally just playing with his final show as a solo artist and with Black Sabbath.
Mm.
And clearly, he wasn't well, and clearly he powered on through. But for him to go so suddenly after that, I mean, it's one hell of a way to bow out, I'll say
Yeah.
that. He really went out on his terms. He lived life to, the absolute fullest.
Hmm.
He had an incredibly successful career as the frontman of Black Sabbath, as a solo artist, as a reality TV star. Just pretty much everything he touched just seemed to sort of work out quite well for him in terms of career moves that he made. And, you know, he is like the heavy metal icon. I mean, rock and roll, you can make arguments for others, but for heavy metal, it's undeniable. I can't really think of anybody else that had that worldwide appeal like Ozzy did. I know, I have in-laws who don't really listen to heavy metal at all. They don't, you could show them a picture of like some of the biggest heavy metal stars of all time, like James Hetfield from Metallica or Rob Halford from Judas Priest, or even Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath, they would have no idea who they are, but they knew who Ozzy was. They recognized him. He just had this reach, and it just showed with the different people who were paying tribute to him, from the heavy metal community to the rock and roll community to the rap and hip hop artists. I've
Mm.
seen Lady Gaga paying tribute to him, Elton John, Rod Stewart, Metallica, Iron Maiden. I don't use this term loosely. I mentioned it on Instagram. But to say we have lost a true giant in the entertainment and the music world is a real understatement. Um, I absolutely love the first six Black Sabbath albums, and I absolutely love the first two albums Ozzy did when he had Randy Rhoads on guitar, Blizzard of
Yeah.
Oz and Diary of a Madman, just great albums. When you look at that, the gathering of those bands together who you know, made their way to Birmingham to pay tribute to Black Sabbath, bands that basically owe their existence to those four men who met each other in Aston, Birmingham, and created this new genre. I know a lot of people like to argue Led Zeppelin started heavy metal. I know a lot of people argue Helter Skelter by the Beatles was the first heavy metal song. I mean, you can sort of see where they're coming from, but to me, the first heavy metal band is Black Sabbath, and the first heavy metal album is Black Sabbath that came out in 1970. And those bands, they simply would not exist if that band didn't become the success that they became, because that spawned bands like Motorhead, later on Metallica, Iron Maiden, then on to Pantera, Korn, and just on and on and on. And as sad as it is to see Ozzy go, because he was also a husband, a father, a grandfather, just truly, truly sad to see that he is no longer with us and will no longer be performing live or writing new music. And it's deeply, deeply upsetting.
Every word that you said was absolutely spot on and true. And yeah, I mean, I got into metal quite late on in life, like sort of late teens, early 20s sort of thing. But growing up as a kid, I knew who Ozzy Osbourne was. Do you know what I mean? Like he had that cultural impact that he just became sort of like a household face, a household name. He had that charisma. He just had that air about him. And I was like, this guy is really bloody cool. Do you know what I mean? And like I remember as a kid growing up, like seeing randomly on the telly, on interviews and talk shows and stuff like that. And I'd say to Mum, "Oh, who's that?" And she'd, "Oh, it's just some old rocker from the 70s who's like, still sort of trying to carry on." I was like, all right. And then obviously when I got into metal like properly, I was like, just some old rocker who's trying to carry on, man. This guy is the don of metal, man. Like, it took me a while to really sort of appreciate just how much of an impact they had, him and the rest of Black Sabbath had on the entire genre. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, there are other bands that you could argue kind of got the ball rolling with that. But yeah, Ozzy just kind of pioneered a complete movement. And your favorite band, and talking about not you personally, Tom, but just you, the audience in general, your favorite band in some way is linked to Black Sabbath and Ozzy. And yeah, like I was watching the back to the beginning concert that they did, and I didn't have a chance to watch it as it was going on. I only watched it about a few days before Ozzy passed, and man, like we were talking about it, how you could tell he still had a little bit of get up and go about him. Like even though he was in the chair and he couldn't get up, he was really kind of like, oh man, he really wants to stand up. He's still got that little bit of energy back. And Tony Iommi said it himself, like a few days after the great man died. It's like he kind of held on for that show, and then once he got through that, it was like, I'm done now. You know what I mean? It's like part of me wonders if he kind of had an idea that he was getting close to the end. I mean, like you said, he was ill for a while. There was a lot of tours that were announced and then they were cancelled because of his health and stuff like that, which is fair enough. But I thought, probably naively, I was like, not that they would like go on and do another tour, because I mean they were all getting on a bit, you know what I mean. But I thought, oh wow, maybe this is going to give a kind of resurgence for him again, because he's reinvented himself so many times. But yeah, just looking into his eyes, there was almost kind of like a, not just an emotion, because this is like a last gig, but like the last thing that he would do in his life, and yeah, like getting back into some of the albums from those early Black Sabbath albums and some of his early solo stuff. Yeah, it just blows me away just how ahead of its time it was, and how people sometimes sort of criticize his singing ability, and you could argue that some of the singers later on that would join Black Sabbath, Dio, Gillan, etc., they were technically better, but they weren't Ozzy. Do you know what I mean? Ozzy just kind of had, as soon as you hear something by Ozzy, whether it's Sabbath or his solo, you just know instantly, oh yeah, that's Ozzy. You know what I mean? He just had an inimitable style, shall we say? And yeah, it's a proper sad time to be a metal fan right now, because it reminds you of your own mortality in a way. You know what I mean? It's like, man, they're kind of dropping like flies right now, and I'm like, oh come on, I'm trying to hold on to the last bastion, and like he was one of those. So
I mean, it was also amazing that, I mean, how poetic of an ending is this as well? Not only did he perform his last show with Black Sabbath, but you had the original lineup
yes,
back together for that final show.
yeah, and again, with all like the politics with what happened over the years with Bill Ward and whatever, the fact is they did it. They kind of they righted a wrong, because when we saw them back in 2014, I think it was, bloody hell, like 11 years ago now. It was like, oh, it's Sabbath and it's Ozzy, but it's not quite the original lineup. You know what I mean? It's like, oh man, but they still played a great show. Do you know what I mean? Even then,
Oh, it was a
like,
phenomenal show.
yeah, back it was Hyde Park, wasn't it? And they had a great set, great support acts. To say support, you had bloody Motorhead, you had Faith No More, Soundgarden, a few other bands and that.
Soulfly.
And it's just kind of mind blowing to me to think that Lemmy and Ozzy, who we saw at that show, are no longer with us. It's
Or
damn,
Chris Cornell.
or Chris Cornell, yeah, bloody hell. So yeah, man, it's just it's sad, but at the end of the day, like you said, he lived his life to the fullest in every sense of the word. You know, whether you kind of agree with the sort of stuff he was doing or not, you know, he loved it. And well, again, like I feel bad for his. Obviously, I feel bad for Sharon. I feel bad for the kids and stuff because you know they've lost. You know, we've lost an icon, but they've lost a family member. So when you put it down to the human level, it's you know it's hard all round.
You
But
know, him and Sharon have been married for, I think, 43 years,
yeah, and you know, obviously,
which is almost unheard of nowadays.
yeah, yeah, it's again, it's an end of several eras in that respect. You know what I mean? Because you know she basically brought him back from the brink. Because
Mm.
when he got you know sacked by Sabbath, was it around 79? He was pretty much like drinking himself into a stupor every day, and she came along and was like, "Oi, you get your ass back up and get on with it," and he
Mm.
did, and the rest is history. You know, so
I mean,
lots of things.
I would argue that some of his solo stuff is actually better than most of the stuff Black Sabbath did without him,
Yeah,
outside of maybe the first two Dio albums they
yeah,
did. Because Heaven and Hell is a great album,
yeah,
and Mob Rules, it's a pretty solid album as well. But after that, Sabbath sort of kind of disappear into the doldrums
yeah,
until they released 13, which was like literally years later, and Ozzy was back in the band at that point.
yeah,
But those solo albums he did, I mentioned Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Bark at the Moon,
yeah,
No More Tears. I think that's the other one. I mean, they're just
yeah,
all really great albums, and he surrounded himself with great musicians: Randy Rhoads, Zach
yeah,
Wild, Robert Trujillo, the Faith No More drummer. I've forgotten his names.
yeah,
Apologies for that. But oh, what's that? It'll come to me. But you know, really overall, really great musicians. And whenever he goes back to or went back to Black Sabbath, he had the likes of Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward to perform with. You know, just
yeah,
I know what you mean though. That original Sabbath lineup, especially those first six albums. I mean, we talk about how great Maiden's early run
yeah,
excuse me, Metallica's early run, Slayer's early run, Sabbath's early run, man. Like, and in such a short space of time, you know,
yeah.
Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Masters of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, Sabotage, just like masterpiece albums,
Oh God, yeah.
you
And
know.
to think that like they did all of those albums before you even like before bands like Metallica and Maiden even like
I
released.
know.
Do you know what I mean? So it just goes to show, like, yeah, they were literally just pioneers, and there'll never be anything else like them. You know,
Mm.
and yeah, like we say, it's a testament to him and to the rest of them, rest of the band, and you know the family and stuff like that. That they had that longevity, and especially him because obviously not only with the music but with you know the Osbournes TV show as well, because that kind of was another reinvention in a way, and it
That
showed.
was actually, I'm embarrassed to say this, that was my first introduction to Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh yeah, no, mate. I mean, it kind of it really got me wanting to explore his music more as a result of that show, and you know it worked because that was part of it. You know what I mean? Like,
I actually found the family when I first watched that show. I found them quite unlikable, but
yeah,
I found Jack and Kelly really annoying. I didn't particularly
yeah,
like Sharon, but
yeah,
I just couldn't help but really like Ozzy. I
yeah.
thought he was so bloody funny.
Oh man, yeah,
That's another thing I've noticed. Like everyone who has met Ozzy, they all say the same thing. Really nice bloke,
yeah.
incredibly funny.
Yeah, no, honestly, like because some of the advice he was giving the band, up, even on that back to the beginning, so and he was just, you know, okay, I'm not a fan of this artist, but even people like Youngblood were coming up to him, and he was just like, yeah, just fucking go for it, and like you take over, just go for America, take that over, and you know what I mean. He was still, even in his sort of like, you know, most frail time, was still giving advice and
Mm.
still, pioneering the next generation. So yeah, and like going back to the Osbournes, like it was almost like a social experiment. It was like right, like the rest of the family were kind of playing up to it a little bit, but Ozzy to me was just being himself the whole bloody time. Okay, there might have been instances where like, okay, just say that bit again, but honestly, the way that he just went around mumbling, swearing at his pets.
Eating burritos.
Yeah, yeah, like drinking massive mugs of tea and like "Ugh, fuck off, like get away from my chicken. And it's just like, yeah, he's a proper dad, you know what I
Mm.
mean? And yeah, and again, that propelled him even more, like around that time. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, such a heavy loss in the community, but in a way, it's like you say, you can look back on his years fondly. It wasn't like he was sort of cut down in his prime, you know. He managed to do everything that he wanted to do.
I was actually talking to my mom about it on early today. I was driving with my mom in the car, and Ozzy came up. She actually brought it up, and
Yeah,
she was really upset because she grew up in that era. You know, she grew up in like the 60s and the 70s, so she was exposed to all this music for the first time. And she told me like when she first heard Paranoid,
yeah,
it was came on the radio, and as soon as that opening riff started, and then the drums and the bass join in, and then that opening vocal line with that
yeah,
vocal melody, she said we had literally never heard anything like that up until that point,
yeah,
and it felt new, it felt refreshing, it felt dangerous
yeah,
listening to it as well. People thought this was music written by Satan himself.
yeah,
It just sounded so evil compared
yeah,
to what else you heard at the time. You know, Led Zeppelin, it was all magical fairy tale type stuff. And you had the Beatles, and I think disco was quite popular at the time as well.
yeah,
And then, but when Black Sabbath came out, it was like, what the hell is this? Just so heavy and so different and so unique. And she also said another thing why she really liked Ozzy, and why my dad also really liked Ozzy as well, is that he never ever forgot where he came from.
no,
A lot of British artists who move abroad to America, um, they sort of become Americanized,
yeah,
if you will. Ozzy never did that. He had a Brummie accent right up until the day he passed away.
yeah,
I think he spent the later part of his life back in the UK.
you did,
Yeah, and he always spoke fondly of his time in Birmingham, always spoke fondly about the early days of Sabbath and growing up and all the mischief and the parties and just everything. Just amazing stories. They're so funny. Like Tony Iommi's autobiography, Iron Man. I was in stitches reading that story,
yeah,
reading that book, listening to all the stories he told about Ozzy and Geezer and how they got the band together. Oh, I highly recommend it, Sean, if you haven't read it. It's
yeah.
so bloody good.
One of those things that happens in life that kind of is inevitable, but you know, with Ozzy, you just never thought it would happen. You know what I mean? Like he should have really snuffed it about 30 years ago. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
my God, like seriously, I don't know how. I mean, I know obviously I'm upset he's died, but at the same time, I'm amazed he made it as far
yeah,
as he did. It's a bit like the Lemmy syndrome. It's like, how are you still alive? You know, with the
yeah,
like with Lemmy, you know, the amount of cigarettes and junk food and
yeah,
Jack Daniels and Coke, like he just wouldn't look after himself.
yeah,
And the fact he went on to live on, how old was he? 72?
yeah. I
73?
think so. Yeah, it was
Yeah, he was in his
age,
70s.
similar age. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same with Ozzy. It's like, I mean, fair play to you, mate.
Well, considering like you were saying about those old story, I think it must have been it was either Paranoid or Master Reality, the recording sessions, and they were talking about how they would literally have like speaker cabinets full of cocaine.
Yeah, that would have been Masters of Reality.
Yeah, and it was just like you know, like the amount considering you know how sort of dangerous to the health that lifestyle was at the time. You know, they all still made it up until you know up until a certain point, and you know, yeah. So you know, fair play. Like we said, he lived his life the way he wanted to live it. He went out on his terms. You
Mhm.
know, and you know, yeah, I can't fault him for anything really because, like you say, not only was he a pioneer in the music, but he was just a cultural icon. And
Even like the whole Ozfest, that was
yes,
like a touring festival.
yeah,
You
you
know,
know,
that was massive when we were growing up, the Ozfest.
yeah, and again, another way of promoting the next generation of bands, and he was all about that, you know. So, yeah, um, bless him, you know. Rest in peace, mate.
Thank you, Ozzy. Rest in peace. Now we move on to, I guess you could call him a slightly more controversial figure, that being Hulk Hogan. Now, obviously, people have their opinions on Terry Bollea.
Yeah,
particularly in the later part of his life as well. We're going to focus on the character of Hulk Hogan
yeah,
because I think it's fair enough to say Hulk Hogan is the biggest wrestling icon of all time.
yeah,
He was the face of wrestling for close to 2 decades. I mean,
yeah,
he just looked like a superhero in real life. He looked like he was like Captain America or something, but in like real life
yeah,
form. He was huge. He had a great look. He had the mustache, a huge physique, and he was like 6'4", 6'5", just a huge dude. And off the back of the incredibly successful WrestleMania 1, it just went like that. There's a reason why they call him the Babe Ruth of wrestling, and he would go on to have great programs with Andre the Giant, and then he would later go on to feud with Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, all the way up until, when he would go to WCW, easily the biggest heel turn of all time. I'm hard pressed to think of another one, but Hogan turning heel and joining the NWO was just mind blowing for the time. And then when he would eventually go back to WWE and have that feud with The Rock, his influence is just undeniable. Forget what you think about Terry Bollea. We're talking specifically Hulk Hogan. He just, and just great at promos. Kids absolutely adored him. He was a merchandise machine. Just like you could just put him in any setting and he would just like put bums in seats,
yeah,
and he made a lot of people very, very rich. Obviously he became very rich himself, but I would hear stories of wrestlers who would do shoot interviews, and they would say like the undercard wrestlers would go and look at the house show spreadsheet for that particular month, and they would always be praying that they would be on the same card as Hogan because they would end up getting paid way more than if
yeah.
he wasn't on the card.
My earliest memory of wrestling is Hulk Hogan. Do you know what I mean? Like even before, again, similar, it's some very like weird similarities with like not personality wise, but just like the whole reinventing oneself as they went on in their career, like to Ozzy and stuff like that. But yeah, I remember. I think I must have been about 5 or 6, and we didn't have Sky at the time, but there used to be a show. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And it was a show on ITV, and it was just called WWW. It was like Worldwide Wrestling, and they would show like highlights of like all the different sort of territories at the time, as far as I remember. And the first face that I remember was seeing Hulk Hogan, and immediately I was just like, "Whoa, this guy is awesome!" And his name is Hulk, and it just evokes images of like the Incredible Hulk, and this just larger than life, almost like superhero, like you were saying, and yeah, and from then I was sort of captivated by it. And when I moved out of my childhood home and I was clearing out some stuff, I actually found a Hulk Hogan wrestling figure and a birthday card with Hulk Hogan's face on it. That was about, must have been when I was about 5, 6, something like that. And I was just like, bloody hell. So even back then, he, by that time, he'd already made himself a household name. And that was going nearly 40 years ago, you know? So yeah, like, depending on what one's opinion is of him personally, like we said before, we're going to separate that because you kind of have to in terms of the impact he had on the wrestling business as a whole. Like you said, he made it a household institution. Okay, you can argue Vince McMahon did that, but Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan to me are kind of intrinsically linked. There's a sort of symbiotic relationship going on there at the beginning, and yeah, it was just an incredible career. I mean, when you think about how he went from being, the ultimate babyface and hero to the most hated heel on the planet when Bash at the Beach '96 came along. And this was at a time where people still believed properly in kayfabe. They thought that this dude, their hero, genuinely decided to turn his back on them and say, well, fuck you, basically. Trash was being thrown in the ring. It was just bedlam. and it gave him a new lease on his career. Like, amazingly enough, thinking, oh, he was kind of getting stale around sort of 93, 94. And then the NWO happened, and then that happened. And then all of a sudden, he was once again the biggest name in wrestling, just from a character pivot. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's so many iconic moments as well. Like, Andre at WrestleMania 3, Ultimate Warrior. Yeah, like you
The
said,
mega powers collide.
the mega powers collide. Absolutely. These guys,
Icon versus icon.
icon versus icon. Arguably the greatest crowd reaction of all time in any match when Rock gives him the rock bottom and he kicks out of it and then goes, and then everyone just went massive, just went absolutely insane. And at that time, what was it, 2002? I think WrestleMania 18. And that was the first time in a long time where I actually became a kid again. You know what I mean? Watching that, because it was like, oh, wow, the old Hulk's back. Because obviously before then, he was still part of the NWO after WCW had been bought out. And then the NWO finally came in like a year or so later. And he was still a nasty piece of work, character-wise anyway, obviously. He tried to kill The Rock a week before, like tried to run him over in his truck, and yet he's getting the biggest babyface reaction like in years in that match, and it just goes to show the impact that he had on people, and the fact that it was like, man, how often do moments like these come along? You know what I mean? And yeah, and
you may disagree with me, but I think the only wrestler that, in my opinion, has come close, and some would argue eclipsed Hulk Hogan, is Stone Cold Steve Austin. I know a lot of
yeah,
people would argue Cena, but Cena, throughout most of his career, was never universally loved.
yeah,
There was half the fan base loved him, half of the fan base hated him.
yeah.
But when Hogan and Austin were both faces of the company, the crowd just became absolutely unglued whenever they made an appearance. Like, they worshipped those two.
It's a sort of a paradigm of the time. You've got your first face of the company, and then your natural successor, and like arguably,
It's like when you do who's the Mount Rushmore, who are the
yeah,
four faces of Mount Rushmore. Everybody goes, well, Hogan and Austin, and then
yeah,
the other two people argue, well, it
all,
should be Cena, or it should be
yeah,
Reigns, or it should be Ric Flair, it should be the Undertaker. But
yeah.
those two are always in the Mount Rushmore of wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. Just again for the multifaceted impact that they had. And okay, you can
Mhm.
argue that some of Hogan's film escapades weren't the greatest, but he was the first one to do it.
I have somewhere buried deep in storage Mr. Nanny on videotape.
Yeah, yeah. And
God awful film. But I
kind of,
loved it when I was younger because I
yeah,
just thought Hogan was
yeah.
great.
And my cousin, who was like, she hasn't watched wrestling in donkey's years, but then
Mm.
she just messaged me yesterday saying, "Oh my God, Hulk Hogan's died." And this is like, like I said, she hasn't watched it in probably 30 years, but she still remembers him because we used to watch it together around the time when he was, the top star of the company. Do you know what I mean? So that again, it's another kind of icon who has cultural impact no matter what. Like even when I talk wrestling, like back in like jobs that I've had and stuff like that, they go, "Oh, I don't watch it anymore," but yeah, I remember Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, and like, you know what I mean. So it's been embedded in the psyche when it comes to wrestling. You know what I mean? So undoubtedly the biggest icon of all time, and I agree that Austin was like the sort of the torchbearer, the next one along in that time period. It's funny how just completely different their characters were as well. And he was, he was
It
the
was a
one
sign of the times, wasn't it?
exactly, yeah. It was an evolution of the audience as they had to compete. Do you know what I mean? Because again, Hogan was the reason why they had to compete in a way because he was in the NWO, and it was like, holy shit, what's going on here? No one could even fathom Hogan being a villain. And again, we won't go into all the sort of dodgy personal stuff that Terry Bollea was involved in. because then this becomes a very different video. But just as an icon in the wrestling business, we couldn't not talk about it, and we couldn't again say to Hulk Hogan, the character at least, thanks for the memories, man.
No, I mean, one of the greatest of all time, if not arguably the GOAT.
Yeah,
Um, just the impact he had. I mean, we mentioned it, like with Black Sabbath, when you look at wrestling how it is now, I think it would have continued, but no way would it be this huge, mega, global sport
yeah,
that is loved and watched by literally millions upon millions of people. One of the most popular sports in terms of numbers it does on social media. I think WWE is in like the top 10 most subscribed channels on YouTube.
yeah,
And a lot of that stems back to the era of Hulk Hogan.
yeah.
And I remember we went through a phase where we were like rolling our eyes about Hulk Hogan because we were like, oh, his finisher was a leg drop. He wasn't that good. His promo
Yeah,
sucked,
we were
etc.
we were like proper like salty wrestling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And you got us tickets for a SmackDown taping at the O2 in London.
yeah,
And Hogan was going to be there. He wasn't wrestling. He'd long retired from in-ring action by this point. But he was making an appearance. He was going to cut a promo. And me and you were like, oh, God, can we just get this old man Hogan out of the way and just watch some decent wrestling? And then he opened the show. And as soon as a Real American hit, me and you just became unglued. Like the
yeah,
whole arena went nuts. I was like, oh
yeah,
my God, it's Hulk Hogan.
yeah, yeah. No,
And he got the biggest reaction of the entire night. And he barely said anything.
yeah. It was just like, thank you, brothers in London,
Mhm.
and blah blah blah. But yeah, like you say, it was just the fact that his presence was among our. We were
Mhm.
among him. You know what I mean? It was like, oh yeah, say what you want. Again, we were like sort of like proper wrestling like purists at that point, and it was like, oh yeah, don't you see him? But just like you say, as soon as that music hit, and as soon as he came out, the inner child in me surfaced, and in
Mhm.
you, and in yourself as well, and you just couldn't help but go, "We are in the presence of royalty at this point." Do you know what I mean?
Wrestling royalty, yeah.
Wrestling royalty, yeah, and yeah, couldn't help it. And then after he buggered off, it was like, yeah, 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 whatever. But in that moment, it was special because
Yeah, yeah.
they don't often happen.
Okay, I think that's a good time to end it. If anybody watching this video and you've made it to the end, if there's anything that you can take away from this, go back, listen to Ozzy Osbourne, listen to Black Sabbath, and in regards to Hogan, go back and watch some of those matches he had in the 80s, the 90s, and even the early 2000s. And it will really give you a good idea. If you haven't already, it will give you a good idea as to why wrestling is in the place and position that it is now in regards to popularity. So thank you very much for watching.